Few people realize that some of the greatest spiritual transformations in the Bible did not begin with great miracles, but with a heart willing to learn. The biblical history of Timothy is one of those cases. He was not the most experienced, not the strongest, and not the most well-known. Yet he became one of the most influential figures in the New Testament. And that raises an uncomfortable question. What did God see in Timothy that often goes unnoticed by us? While many sought visibility, Timothy learned to seek communion. While others wanted recognition, he chose faithfulness. The Bible shows that his strength was not in age, title, or self-confidence, but in a teachable heart aligned with God. Biblical history reveals that God does not look for the most ready, but for the most available. And that completely changes how we view our own spiritual journey. Perhaps you have already thought that you are not enough, that you started too late, or that you do not have what it takes. The life of Timothy confronts that idea head-on. The Bible proves that God works with process, not perfection. Biblical history shows that communion, perseverance, and faithfulness build extraordinary destinies. And all of it begins with a simple decision: to turn the heart back to God. Throughout this content, you will discover deep lessons from the life of Timothy that speak directly about prayer, character, truth, perseverance, and legacy. Teachings that are not superficial, but transformative. If you desire to grow spiritually and develop a real life of communion with God, this study is for you. So before we continue, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any content, and we'll keep learning from the Bible and biblical history in a clear, deep, and practical way. Now, take a deep breath, open your heart, and come walk with us through the lessons of Timothy. The first lesson we learn from Timothy is that a ministerial calling originates in God, not in human validation. The Bible reveals in the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 1, verse 12, that Paul acknowledges he was considered faithful by God before any human recognition. Biblical history makes it clear that ministry is born from grace, not merit. God calls first and explains later. This principle completely reshapes how vocation is understood. Timothy learned that a calling does not depend on applause to exist. The Bible shows that God entrusts responsibility even before public agreement appears. Biblical history is filled with callings that began in anonymity. This teaches that heaven does not wait for earth's approval to act. A true calling always comes before recognition. When a calling comes from God, it sustains a person through seasons of silence. Timothy did not need constant encouragement to continue, because his conviction was rooted in God's will. The Bible teaches that clarity of calling strengthens perseverance. Biblical history shows that those who know who called them do not quit easily. Consistency is born from conviction. Another essential aspect of this lesson is understanding that calling is not a position, but a mission. Timothy was set apart to serve before he was called to lead. The Bible reveals that God observes faithfulness in small things. Biblical history shows that strong ministries begin with simple tasks. Quiet service is part of divine preparation. A calling that comes from God also organizes motives and priorities. Timothy learned that pleasing God comes before pleasing people. The Bible teaches that seeking human approval weakens the mission. Biblical history shows that those who understand the origin of their calling walk with greater firmness. Faithfulness becomes more important than popularity. The second lesson we learn from Timothy is that a divine calling confirms and strengthens spiritual identity. The Bible shows that Paul affirms he was empowered by God for ministry, as recorded in the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 1, verse 12. Biblical history teaches that healthy identity is born from the right source. Whoever knows who called them understands who they are. Timothy did not build his identity on people's opinions, but on the mission he received. The Bible reveals that identity in God does not fluctuate with circumstances. Biblical history shows that those who know their identity are not trapped by comparison. This produces spiritual stability, and stability sustains ministry over time. Another aspect of this lesson is that identity in God protects against insecurity. Timothy would face challenges related to age and responsibility. The Bible teaches that calling does not remove weaknesses, but redefines their value. Biblical history shows that God uses ordinary people to fulfill extraordinary purposes. The focus shifts from limitation to faithfulness. When identity and calling walk together, the mission becomes clear. Timothy did not need to prove his worth, only to live out his purpose. The Bible teaches that obedience comes before results. Biblical history confirms that God honors those who remain faithful. This faithfulness is built day by day. The third lesson we learn from Timothy is that a calling must be sustained by grace, not by human effort. The Bible reveals that Paul recognizes everything he received came from God's mercy. Biblical history teaches that ministry is not a burden, but a responsibility upheld by grace. Those who understand this do not walk overwhelmed, they walk dependent. Timothy learned that grace does not eliminate commitment, but makes commitment possible. The Bible shows that God equips those he calls. Biblical history reveals that no one is sent without being sustained. This produces inner rest even amid responsibility. Trust becomes daily. Another point of this lesson is that grace keeps the heart humble. Timothy did not serve to assert himself, but to obey. The Bible teaches that everything comes from God and belongs to God. Biblical history shows that humility preserves the calling over time. Where grace is present, pride has no room. This understanding prepares the ground for something even deeper. The Bible begins to show that calling does not arise in isolation, but is cultivated in environments of faith. Biblical history points to the spiritual influence that shaped Timothy from an early age, and it is precisely here that faith passed down through family comes into focus, naturally opening the next topic. In the spiritual journey of Timothy, the Bible presents Lesson 4 as an indispensable foundation: perseverance in prayer. In the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 2, verse 1, Paul instructs that before anything else, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made. Biblical history shows that prayer is not secondary, but central. It sustains decisions, aligns the heart, and strengthens faith. Without constant prayer, spiritual life loses direction. Timothy learned that persevering in prayer does not mean seeking God only in difficult moments. The Bible reveals that consistency creates spiritual depth. Biblical history teaches that daily prayer keeps the relationship alive. When prayer becomes a habit, the heart learns to depend on God at all times. Perseverance turns communion into a foundation. Still within Lesson 4, prayer expands spiritual vision. The Bible shows that Paul instructs believers to intercede for everyone without distinction. Biblical history reveals that intercession breaks selfishness and forms a sensitive heart. Timothy learned that praying for others shapes character. Constant prayer produces inner maturity. From this foundation of prayer, the Bible introduces Lesson 5, which is feeding on sound doctrine. In the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 4, verse 6, Paul teaches that the servant of God must be nourished by the words of faith and good doctrine. Biblical history shows that faith without truth becomes fragile. Spiritual growth requires proper nourishment. The Word strengthens both mind and heart. Timothy was instructed to remain firm in the truth. The Bible reveals that sound doctrine protects against spiritual deception and confusion. Biblical history teaches that many deviations begin when truth is neglected. Feeding on the Word produces discernment. Commitment to truth preserves faith over time. Lesson 5 also reveals that healthy doctrine produces emotional stability. The Bible shows that the Word is an anchor for the soul. Biblical history confirms that well-founded faith withstands pressure and change. Timothy learned that knowing the truth prevents being carried away by spiritual trends. Consistency in the Word generates inner firmness. From prayer and truth flows practice. Presented in Lesson 6, the exercise of godliness. In the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 4, verse 8, the Bible teaches that godliness is profitable for all things, for the present life and the life to come. Biblical history shows that spirituality is not merely knowledge, it must be lived daily. Godliness shapes character. Timothy learned that godliness requires continuous discipline. The Bible reveals that spiritual exercise does not happen automatically. Biblical history shows that godly habits build a coherent life. Daily practice strengthens faith, and practiced faith becomes visible. Lesson 6 also teaches that godliness impacts every area of life. The Bible shows that it influences attitudes, decisions, and relationships. Biblical history reveals that a godly life produces concrete fruit. Spirituality moves from speech to testimony. What is internal becomes external. This set of lessons, persevering prayer, commitment to truth, and the exercise of godliness begins to form visible character. The Bible starts to show that a well-cultivated spiritual life is reflected in speech, conduct, and love. Biblical history leads Timothy into a new level of responsibility. And it is precisely at this point that personal example becomes essential, naturally opening the way to the next topic. In the formation of Timothy, the Bible presents Lesson 7 as an essential milestone, being an example in speech, conduct, and love. In the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 4, verse 12, Paul instructs that no one should despise his youth, but that he should be a model in every area of life. Biblical history shows that spiritual leadership begins with testimony. Before words, there are actions. Example builds authority. Timothy learned that testimony is not limited to the pulpit but is expressed in daily life. The Bible teaches that speech reveals the heart. Biblical history shows that words carry spiritual weight. Being an example in speech requires coherence, truth, and grace. What is spoken must reflect what is believed. Testimony begins with the mouth. Beyond speech, Lesson 7 highlights conduct. The Bible shows that actions confirm or deny the faith one professes. Biblical history reveals that many ministerial failures begin with practical inconsistency. Timothy was called to live with integrity. Daily behavior becomes a living message. Faith becomes visible through actions. Love also occupies a central place in this lesson. The Bible teaches that love is a sign of spiritual maturity. Biblical history shows that spiritual leaders are recognized by how they treat people. Timothy learned that love is not optional. It is essential. Love validates testimony. Without love, example loses strength. From this visible testimony, the Bible introduces Lesson 8, which addresses purity in the midst of temptation. In the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 5, verse 22, Paul instructs believers not to share in the sins of others and to keep themselves pure. Biblical history shows that purity is spiritual protection. It preserves both heart and ministry. Vigilance becomes necessary. Timothy learned that purity requires discernment and clear boundaries. The Bible reveals that small compromises open the door to major falls. Biblical history shows that many lost authority by neglecting purity. Remaining pure is a daily choice. Integrity sustains the calling. Lesson 8 also reveals that purity is not isolation, but holiness in relationship. The Bible teaches that it is possible to live in the world without being contaminated by it. Biblical history shows that spiritual leaders must practice self-control. Timothy was instructed to guard his heart. Purity strengthens testimony. Next, the Bible presents Lesson 9, Contentment as a Way of Life. In the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 6, verse 6, Paul teaches that godliness with contentment is great gain. Biblical history shows that contentment protects against greed. It realigns expectations. True wealth is not found in accumulation, but in satisfaction in God. Timothy learned that contentment is born from trust in God's provision. The Bible reveals that constant dissatisfaction weakens faith. Biblical history shows that disordered desire leads to many evils. Living satisfied with what God provides brings inner peace. Contentment guards the heart. These lessons' visible example, Inner purity and sincere contentment shape a whole and consistent character. The Bible shows that Christian testimony is strengthened when life reflects faith. Biblical history leads Timothy into a season of greater challenges, and it is precisely at this point that courage and perseverance become indispensable, opening the way for the next topic. In the journey of Timothy, the Bible presents Lesson 10 as essential for facing the reality of ministry, courage in the face of difficulties. In the second letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 1, verse 7, Paul affirms that God did not give a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and self-control. Biblical history shows that fear is one of the greatest obstacles to the mission. Courage is not born from the absence of problems, but from trust in God. Serving requires inner firmness. Timothy learned that fear must not govern decisions. The Bible teaches that divine calling comes accompanied by spiritual empowerment. Biblical history reveals that faithful leaders faced opposition, rejection, and insecurity. Even so, they moved forward. Courage is revealed when one continues despite fear. Faith overcomes dread. This courage is also connected to emotional balance. The Bible shows that God grants self-control. Biblical history teaches that impulsive reactions weaken testimony. Timothy was instructed to act with wisdom. True courage is not aggressive. It is steady. It sustains the mission in difficult times. As challenges increase, the Bible introduces Lesson 11, which deals with suffering for the gospel. In the second letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 2, verse 3, Paul exhorts believers to endure hardship like a good soldier of Christ. Biblical history shows that suffering is part of the Christian journey. It is not a sign of failure, but of faithfulness. Serving God involves sacrifice. Timothy learned that suffering for the gospel is not a cause for shame. The Bible reveals that suffering strengthens faith. Biblical history shows that many matured spiritually in the midst of tribulation. Perseverance is born in confrontation with difficulty. Suffering shapes character. Another aspect of this lesson is understanding that suffering is not endured alone. The Bible shows that God sustains those who remain faithful. Biblical history reveals that grace becomes more evident in times of pain. Timothy was encouraged to remain firm. Spiritual endurance grows in adversity. Amid challenges and suffering, the Bible presents Lesson 12, remaining firm in the truth. In the second letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 3, verse 14, Paul instructs believers to remain in what they have learned. Biblical history shows that truth is an anchor in difficult times. When everything changes, the word remains. Faithfulness to the truth preserves faith. Timothy learned that difficult times do not justify abandoning the truth. The Bible teaches that the Word of God is a secure foundation. Biblical history reveals that many strayed by yielding to pressure. Remaining firm requires conviction. Truth sustains ministry. Lesson 12 also teaches that truth must be guarded in the heart. The Bible shows that superficial knowledge does not withstand crisis. Biblical history reveals that those who internalize the Word remain stable. Timothy was prepared not to negotiate principles. Faithfulness protects the calling. These lessons courage in the face of difficulties, willingness to suffer for the gospel, and firmness in the truth strengthen spiritual maturity. The Bible shows that challenges reveal the depth of faith. Biblical history leads Timothy into a season of perseverance until the end, and it is precisely at this point that the idea of spiritual battle and legacy begins to take shape, preparing the way for the next topic. In the final stage of Timothy's journey, the Bible presents Lesson 13 as a call to conscious perseverance, to fight the good fight of faith. In the first letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 6, verse 12, Paul exhorts him to fight the good fight and take hold of eternal life. Biblical history shows that the Christian faith is not passive. It requires consistency, endurance, and ongoing commitment. Remaining faithful is a daily decision. Timothy learned that the fight of faith is not against people, but against inner surrender. The Bible reveals that the battle takes place in the heart and mind. Biblical history teaches that many began well, but did not persevere to the end. Fighting the good fight means continuing to believe even when the path becomes difficult. Faithfulness sustains the journey. This fight also involves keeping focus on eternal purpose. The Bible shows that the Christian life points to something greater than the present moment. Biblical history reveals that those who lose this vision grow weary more quickly. Timothy was instructed to keep his eyes on the promise. Hope strengthens perseverance. As the journey advances, the Bible presents Lesson 14. To fulfill the ministry with diligence. In the second letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 4, verse 5, Paul instructs him to be sober-minded, endure hardship, and fully carry out the ministry. Biblical history shows that it is not enough to start well. It is necessary to finish faithfully. Zeal honors the calling. Timothy learned that fulfilling the ministry requires ongoing responsibility. The Bible reveals that negligence compromises testimony. Biblical history shows that God expects faithfulness in carrying out the mission. Ministry is not occasional. It is continual. Diligence preserves integrity. Another aspect of this lesson is understanding that ministry must be lived out to the very end. The Bible shows that weariness does not cancel responsibility. Biblical history teaches that perseverance is part of the calling. Timothy was prepared not to abandon the mission. Consistency glorifies God. At the conclusion of this journey, the Bible presents Lesson 15, leaving a legacy of faith. In the second letter of Paul to Timothy, chapter 4, verse 7, Paul declares that he has fought the good fight, finished the race, and kept the faith. Biblical history shows that the greatest legacy is not material, but spiritual. Faithfulness leaves a mark on generations. Timothy learned that legacy is built throughout life. The Bible reveals that the end confirms the journey. Biblical history teaches that remaining faithful until the last day is a spiritual victory. Legacy is born from consistency. Lived faith becomes inheritance. This spiritual inheritance does not depend on visibility, but on faithfulness. The Bible shows that God honors those who keep the faith. Biblical history reveals that many were remembered not for what they possessed, but for what they believed. Timothy was formed to live with this horizon in mind. Eternity guides decisions. In the end, these lessons, persevering in faith, fulfilling the ministry with zeal, and leaving a faithful legacy, close the cycle of spiritual formation. The Bible shows that the Christian journey is completed through faithfulness. Biblical history confirms that the life of Timothy points to a calling that spans generations. And thus, the journey does not end with a period, but becomes inspiration for all who choose to remain faithful until the end. As we come to the end of this journey through the life of Timothy, what remains is not just a reflection on a character from the Bible, but on a path available to anyone who desires to live a genuine faith. The biblical history of Timothy is not about perfection, but about faithfulness built day after day. He was not marked by grand speeches, but by consistency, obedience, and communion with God. This reminds us that a healthy spiritual life begins in the heart, not on a stage. Timothy teaches us that walking with God is a daily choice. He learned to pray, to guard the truth, to live with purity, to face difficulties, to persevere, and to remain faithful until the end. The Bible shows that this communion is not born from haste, but from intimacy. Biblical history reveals that God draws near to those who choose to turn their hearts back to Him. Communion is not the absence of struggles, but the presence of God in the midst of them. Perhaps the greatest invitation the life of Timothy offers is this: slow down, listen more carefully to God's voice, and align the heart with His will. The Bible shows that when the heart turns back to God, life finds direction. Biblical history proves that those who cultivate communion do not live lost, even in difficult times. God continues to shape ordinary people for eternal purposes. Now, the question that remains is personal and unavoidable. Which lesson from the life of Timothy inspires or impresses you the most? Is it perseverance, faithfulness, courage, love for the truth? Write it in the comments, because sharing this strengthens others who are also walking this journey of faith. If this content spoke to you and helped you see the Bible and biblical history in a deeper way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way, you continue learning, growing, and being built up with teachings that strengthen communion with God. May the life of Timothy continue to inspire you to remain faithful, with your heart turned toward God every single day.